Well, hello, my dear friends. Justyn Smith here, and I want to thank you so much for click and play today. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to Luke 12 as we deliver this topic and the title, Rich Toward God. Rich Toward God. I very specifically want to address how, if we live in the flesh, we will not be rich toward God, but God desires us to live rich toward Him. Notice what it says in Luke 12:21, and we're going to come to that verse in just a second. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. And you find out as we study today that the one who layeth up treasure for himself is covetous, is selfish, and has no vision for living for God eternally, has no commitment to God whatsoever. Therefore, he's rich to himself and not rich toward God. Let's bring up point number one, which is the desire for inheritance. The desire for inheritance. There is one man in the company that said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. So this is the desire for inheritance that a man had, and he was praying to Jesus Christ, actually. He's asking Jesus to make his situation better. My brother won't share his inheritance with me. That leads me to point number two. The master's response. And we're going to understand the response in two different ways. We are going to listen to the response of Jesus to the audience and the individual man, as well as then the parable that Jesus gives explaining his point to the man and to the audience. Listen to how Jesus responds first to the one in the company. He said unto him, Man, who made me a judge or divider over you? Think about Jesus' response right now. Think about, would you like to be the man who had Jesus answer your prayer in this way? No. I mean, this is before the audience now of all these people. You thought he was going to make your situation better with your brother, but Jesus is like, no, I'm not going to do it, and there's a reason why. And here's how Jesus turns to the audience and speaks. He said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. First of all, how would you like to be the man that becomes the object to the class as a lesson of what not to do and how not to live? Put yourself in this man's situation, because that's who this man became to everyone there who was listening. Oh, Jesus would say, I've got a good point for you based upon what this man has asked for. Do not live in covetousness. Your life does not consist in the abundance of things which you possess. And this is a challenge for us today, because how many of us think that our life would be better if we had this, and then if we had that, and then if we added this, and if we added that, oh, we've finally made it in life. No, 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 because in that place of covetousness, we are not rich toward God. So this is where Jesus, in his response, then turns to a parable after speaking to the one in the company, and then after speaking to the audience, the company. Notice what it says in verse 16. He spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And before I go any further, let's understand that God is all over this man's life, even though this rich man does not recognize God, because God is allowing the ground to bring forth plentifully. But yet this life is more spiritual than this man is giving credit for, because this man thought within himself, saying, What shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. Now let me pause right here from verse 18 and say this. You ought to be a good steward of what God has allowed you in this life. things are not wrong unless the things have you. But if you can have those things and have them, and then have them toward God, you are in a very good place. And when you have things, you ought to take care of those things, and you ought to be able to provide for those things. But this man is not trusting in God. This man is trusting in the things, his fruits and his goods. Because it says in verse 19, "And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry." And he literally, here in verse 19, is trusting in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. He has acquired, and so now that he has acquired, he doesn't live toward God. Notice what it says as he is eating, drinking, and being merry. God comes to him in verse 20 and said unto him, "Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided?" And before I go any further with the next verse that we have already looked at, but to be reminded of, God calls this individual who is wrapped up in covetousness a fool. And God says, tonight, now, you had a plan, right? You were going to eat, drink, and be merry. You were going to be established for years. But God's like, I have a different plan. Tonight is your time to go home. Which, by the way, God gives and God takes away. God has an appointment for man. This appointment no man can avoid. It is the appointment of death. And God knows when it will be, whether you take medicine or whether you don't, whether you've lived healthy or whether you have not. Now, we ought to be good stewards, again, of the bodies that God has given to us, but ultimately, our life is in His hands. He gives, He takes away. That then leads to point number, or Luke 12:21. So is he. You are likewise like this parable. Okay, you are like the man who laid up much goods for many years and rejoiced in those riches. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So God is trying to get a hold of the one in the company as well as the entire company with a parable teaching against covetousness and rather being rich toward God, which then leads to a third point. Being rich toward God begins with trusting God in all things. Now, there are many verses that we could look at, but we're just looking at the beginning, okay? We're looking at how being rich toward God starts. And it starts with trusting God in all things. Verse 22, "And he said unto his disciples, Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, neither for your body, what ye shall put on." So he begins to teach them how to be rich toward him. Now, we got to think about the story, okay? There is one in the company who desires the inheritance to be shared from the brother to himself. Okay, Jesus says no. Then Jesus turns to everybody else, the audience, and speaks to them. Okay, he speaks to them and says, "Beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth." Then he tells a parable. And he says, "So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, but is not rich toward God." Then Jesus turns to his disciples and speaks to this third crowd. So the first is the individual of the company that has a great desire from Jesus. The second is the company that is around them. The third is that inner core, if you will, the disciples of Christ who are constantly taken in and constantly learning about the way of God. He teaches them how being rich toward God begins with not laying up treasure for yourself, but trusting in God. As we go back to the verse, he said unto his disciples, "Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, neither for your body, what ye shall put on." And he goes on to say some more things following in verse 22 that literally deal with the day in, day out living of a true disciple of Christ who is rich toward God by believing God every single day for the needs in his life. So as we talk about being rich toward God, there are really many, many different applications to a believer's life. How do I live rich toward God? This message is mainly dealing with those who are not living rich toward God, that should be living rich toward God, by removing covetousness from their life, by removing that philosophy that says, if I have more things, I am somebody and I will be cared for. No, 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 no. Because ultimately, God is in control of this thing, and ultimately our allegiance should be to Him. We should respect Him. We should know that He is, and we should be willing to be rich toward Him. And being rich toward Him begins by living the life of faith in Him, trusting Him, not trusting in the abundance of things which we possess. My dear friends, I want to thank you for listening to Luke 12 with me today. So much more could be said about this topic, as well as the other things that we haven't even touched in Luke 12. But thank you for joining us for this little portion of Luke, hopefully being an encouragement to you to say, okay, wait a second. I don't want to live for things. I want to live for God. I want to be rich toward Him. I do wish you a blessed day. Thank you so much for joining us on the channel. Thank you for clicking play.